And now for the Psychoses. 1955, 1956, here's the volume. This is what we're going to be working with here. So far we've read up to page 28 of this book, and a lot of the good action starts on page 11 and goes through page 14. So we can pretty well focus there and bounce around a little bit more. But first, let's back up a little bit and start with some basics here. And as basic as life, human life. A baby is born, and in order for this baby to have its needs met, and they are only needs, a baby needs food, water, shelter, clothing, warmth, coolness when it gets too hot, so on and so forth. The needs about which we're speaking here, in other words, are material needs. They are base needs. They are animal needs. They are biological needs that you all still have too, me as well. In order for a human infant to have its material, biological needs met, it needs help from others, which is the second basic condition of humanity itself. The first is you have to be born into a body. In order to be a human, you have to have a body. It doesn't mean you have to have legs. It doesn't mean your body has to be the same shape as mine, but you have to have one. All humans have bodies. What's interesting is the differences in bodies, and even more interesting than that is the way that certain body differences have been allowed to make a difference in society. Skin tone versus, the shape of your fingernails. Eye color versus the identifiable aspects of the outer ear. Certain bodily differences make a difference in society. But in order to be human, everybody has to have a body despite their differences, sociologically, imported, and otherwise. The second basic criteria for humanity is that all human bodies have to receive care from others. Now, at this point in your life, you don't need much care from others, perhaps. But as an infant, each of us would not have got to this point in our lives without receiving care from others. It doesn't have to be a mommy, doesn't have to be a daddy, doesn't have to be an uncle or an aunt. Hell, it might not even need to be a human. But for the most part, it is. It could have been a sibling in your case, it could have been a grandparent in your case, it could have been a mom, it could have been a dad, it could have been an aunt, an uncle, you name it. But it has to be somebody else. Because an infant cannot feed itself. You have to bring it food, put it in its mouth. An infant cannot change its own diaper. An infant cannot kick off a blanket if it gets too hot. An infant sure as heck can't go to the drawer, get some new pajamas, and put those on if it gets too cold. My point here is that in order for the infant to have its needs met, and thus in order to survive, it has to receive care from others. Somebody else has to do all of that for the infant. And if you think about it from a more morbid point of view, you can see my point here. If a baby is born, a human baby, and you just set it in the corner of the room and walk away, you can come back in a minute, in an hour, in a day, in a week, in a month. That baby is still going to be there. It lacks the motor skills to do anything except just lay where you put it. That's how basic the material existence of a baby is, especially a human baby. We're not like colts that are born and then an hour later we're up on our feet standing like, whoa, I'm now somewhere else in the world. No. Our need for care from others continues for a long time. Months, sometimes even years. To such an extent that New parents oftentimes refer to the first 3 months of their child's life as the fourth trimester. That's not the only reason they call it the fourth trimester, but it captures the extent to which this being is still in need. The idea here is that all human babies are born premature. We should have stayed in for another 3 months before popping out, but that's not how human biology works, because the head would be too large and it'd create a big disruption for the mother slash host organism for the parasite known as the child. It's a good way to think, host organism and parasite, because in utero the relationship is quite parasitic. And it's worth just thinking about it that way, not because it derides pregnancy or anything like that, but because it's biologically accurate and very important for us to hold in mind. So even in the first 3 months, it's almost like the child's needs are so significant that they are in utero needs, that the child could have actually remained in utero and had those needs better met than if they had been on the outside. So my point here is that this goes on for quite a while. Now, how does the child's needs get met? In order to have its needs met, the child cries. And a parent, primary caregiver of any sort hears this cry and comes running and has to guess, what exactly does this child need? Because the child doesn't have words. The child can't say, I'm hungry or I'm tired. The child just knows that something is off and they cry about it. And the job of the primary caregiver is to show up and effectively guess what it is that the child needs. In other words, the meaning of the child's cry is dependent on the adult's response more than the child themselves. The child just knows something is off. They can't distinguish their stomach from their foot. They don't know anything about that. They just know they feel uncomfortable, period. The child cries. The primary caregiver shows up and has to guess the meaning of that cry. So the child cries, and some parents, their first go-to is, well, let's check and see if the kid needs a diaper change. They bring that meaning and assign it to the child's cry. They guess the significance of the cry as dirty diaper. That's the meaning of the cry that translates into the parental or primary caregiver's action of trying to change a diaper. So let's say you show up, the child's crying, you check the diaper, it's dry. Doesn't need a diaper change. You might then guess, the child must be hungry. So you bring it food. In this case, the child is still crying. Same cry you heard before, but you have made a new guess as to its meaning. Now you bring it food. And let's say that works. The child eats, falls asleep, stops crying, and is comfortable. In this case, the primary caregiver, you would have guessed right. The child was hungry. The meaning of their cry was, please feed me, I'm hungry. But that was a meaning that you as primary caregiver brought to the child. Over time, the child can learn that when I cry, I'm brought food. And you may interpret that. You may have had such great success feeding this child that whenever they cry, you first try and feed them from now on. Now here's the thing. When you bring a child food, if it cries and you bring it food, you are not just satisfying their material need for nourishment. You see, hunger goes away when you put food on it. It'll come back as the food gets metabolized and so forth, but it will go away. What you are bringing a child, though, when you also bring it food or a blanket or a diaper change or whatever, is you're also demonstrating care. And this is something different. Needs can be satisfied, but the feeling of love and the longing for care and connection and affection that a child also receives when you do nice stuff for it, like bring it food, that's insatiable. It's something different. It's not a need, this longing for care and affection and love. It's a demand. And that's something different. There is the need for food, and the demand for care, for love. Need can be satisfied, but demand cannot. In other words, as time goes on, and as you continually assign meaning to the child's cry, the child in turn learns to accept that meaning. When I cry, I get food. But also to associate the bringing of food with a new kind of meaning, a meaning that we might ascribe to love. The child would think to itself, this is what it means to love me. This is what it looks like when you care for another person. This is what care looks like. It involves food. This is what connection looks like. It involves food. Is it any coincidence that most first dates occur over a meal? Not in the least. Because this was one of the first opportunities for the child to experience love and connection with another person. In other words, to receive care from others. Care from others. Absolutely crucial here is this distinction between need and demand. Needs are material, they are biological, and they can be satisfied. Demand for love, for care, for affection, they are sociological. And as we're about to see, they're also linguistic.